My name is Cynthia Parker, and I am 42 years old. If anyone had walked into my house that evening, they would have seen the glow of candles, the glisten of fine silverware, and the warmth of a perfectly roasted turkey resting in the center of the table. They would have seen smiles, polite laughter, and the kind of curated harmony that only happens once a year, on Christmas Eve. But I knew better. That night, something was off. The tension in the air didn't scream, it whispered. Between the glasses clinking and the murmured toasts, there was a silence, a stillness, that sat like a shadow just behind the flicker of the Christmas lights. I could feel it watching me. Judging me. And I didn't know why. I had spent 3 days preparing every detail of that dinner. The cranberry sauce was made from scratch, the stuffing was my grandmother's recipe, and the wine was handpicked from a vineyard Adam and I had visited during our 10th anniversary. Everything was designed to say, we are together, we are whole. And for the first time in many years, that illusion almost felt real. Almost. My parents were seated near the fireplace, exchanging glances that only decades of marriage can justify. My in-laws sat on the opposite end, content and a little too quiet. Noah, my 17-year-old son, scrolled through his phone between bites, and my sister-in-law tried to keep her toddler from pulling down the tablecloth. And there, near the head of the table, sat Eleanor. Eleanor. My aunt, my mentor, the woman who gave me my first copy of Jane Eyre and taught me to believe in the magic of words. She had driven all the way from Boston to be here. Her presence alone made the evening feel complete, or so I thought. She wore a deep green velvet dress and a brooch I remembered from my childhood, shaped like a snowflake. She smiled often, but rarely with her eyes. I had chalked that up to age, perhaps grief. She had lost her husband 2 winters ago, but now I wonder if I had been blind on purpose. If the version of her I believed in was nothing but a character I had written to protect myself. There was a moment, just a moment, when Eleanor glanced across the table at Adam, and their eyes met for longer than necessary. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else would have noticed. But I did. And for the briefest instant, a chill ran down my spine. I remember the sound of silverware clinking against china. The low hum of Christmas music in the background. The way my youngest niece giggled when the dog snuck a piece of bread from her plate. I remember everything. But what I remember most was the silence that grew louder with every smile, every toast, every forced laugh. I had wanted that dinner to be perfect. A celebration of resilience, of family, of everything we had managed to keep intact despite the chaos of the world. I had wanted to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I still had control, that I still belonged in a world where love meant something. But perfection is a cruel lie. It doesn't come with trumpets or fanfare. It comes in the form of a calm evening, a full table, and the quiet realization that everyone is pretending. That the people you love most might be carrying truths that could shatter you. And deep down, I think I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. Not on Christmas Eve. Not while the fire was crackling, and the snow was falling softly outside, and my heart was still foolish enough to believe in peace. I smiled through it. I laughed when I had to. I played my role. Because that night, I was not just a wife or a mother or a host. I was a woman trying to hold a world together with trembling hands and a heart full of hope. But something was coming. Something I couldn't stop. And when it arrived, it would tear through everything I thought I knew, leaving only questions, silence, and the taste of betrayal. That was the night everything began to unravel. The moment I had been holding together by sheer will finally slipped through my fingers like sand. Adam stood up just as I was reaching for the dessert plates. His chair scraped the hardwood floor with a sound that made every conversation halt. He held his wine glass, half full, in one hand, and with the other, he made a small gesture, barely more than a twitch, asking for silence. I smiled reflexively, thinking he was about to offer a toast. It was his habit every Christmas to raise a glass and speak words of gratitude, of love, of unity. For 18 years, I had listened to those toasts like they were poetry written just for me. I braced myself to hear them again, to feel, even if just for a moment, that I was still the center of his world. But this time, the tone in his voice was different. It was low, deliberate, void of celebration. I need to say something, he began, and the entire room seemed to shrink. Even the fire in the hearth crackled quieter. He looked at no one and everyone. His eyes moved slowly across the faces gathered, lingering for the briefest second on mine. Then Eleanor. Then Noah. "I owe you all the truth," he said. "Especially you, Cynthia." My skin prickled. I felt the plate I held tilt in my hand, the weight of it suddenly too much. I set it down, carefully, as if noise could somehow make this worse. Adam took a breath, but it did not steady him. "For a long time, I've kept something from you. Something I should have said years ago. But I was afraid. Afraid of what it would do to this family. Afraid of losing everything." I could hear the clink of a fork dropped by my sister-in-law. Eleanor sat impossibly still. Noah looked up from his phone, sensing the gravity of his father's voice. "I've been in a relationship," Adam said. "Outside of our marriage. For 15 years. The words did not hit me all at once. They came in fragments, like shattered glass slicing slowly through silence. My mouth went dry. I stared at him, trying to process the arithmetic of betrayal. 15 years. Our marriage had lasted 18. That meant, from the very beginning. He continued speaking, but I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. My breath caught. Someone gasped. I think it was my mother. Still, I could not move. "It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake," he said. "It was real. And I know that doesn't make it right. But it's the truth. And she deserves to be acknowledged too." He turned his head. And that was when he looked at her. At Eleanor. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply looked back at him, and in that moment, I saw everything. No denial. No apology. Just an unbearable, undeniable truth hanging between them like smoke that refused to dissipate. I could not speak. My tongue felt like stone in my mouth. My heart, like paper set aflame. I looked around the room, desperate for some anchor, some face that didn't mirror the shock and horror I felt. But everyone was paralyzed. Even Noah, who had dropped his phone, stared at the table like it might offer some escape. Adam lowered his glass without taking a sip. "I'm sorry," he said. "To all of you. But mostly to you, Cynthia. You didn't deserve this. You never did." I wanted to scream. To demand answers. To throw something. To collapse. But I did none of those things. Instead, I sat there. Frozen. Hollow. Betrayed in front of everyone I loved, on a night that was supposed to prove we were still a family. The toast that never happened now echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. And in its place was a truth that shattered everything. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The room had become a portrait of stunned disbelief, painted in the dim light of candles and a crackling fire that now felt far too warm against my skin. I couldn't look at them, neither of them. Not Adam, who still stood there with the coward's weight of partial honesty on his shoulders. Not Eleanor, who had sat in my home, eaten my food, kissed my son on the forehead, and dared to play the part of a beloved aunt. For 15 years. 15 years. That number kept repeating in my head like a curse. 15 years of deception. 15 years of dinners, family vacations, holidays, birthdays, all wrapped in lies. 15 years in which I had laughed at their private jokes, poured wine into both their glasses, never once suspecting that they were toasting to a secret life without me. The decorations around us, red and gold ribbons, pine cones dusted with artificial snow, a garland framing the fireplace, suddenly looked obscene. Like stage props in a play whose script I had never read. And yet, I had been the main character all along. Just not in the way I thought. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt unsteady, like they had forgotten their purpose. I wasn't sure if I wanted to run or scream. My eyes scanned the table, avoiding theirs, and instead landing on Noah. His face was pale, mouth slightly open, eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give an explanation. He didn't understand. How could he? My mother was crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin. My father sat stiffly, his jaw tight, arms crossed in a pose of masculine restraint. Harper looked like she might throw up. My sister-in-law whispered something to her husband, but he didn't respond. Everyone had become statues, witnesses frozen in place as my world cracked open. Still, not a word from Eleanor. Not a single word. She sat with her hands in her lap, her chin slightly lifted, eyes fixed on the center of the table, as if that centerpiece of holly and pine could somehow explain away her betrayal. There was no shame. Just that same unreadable expression I had seen during dinner. Now I recognized it for what it was: detachment. Control. I turned to Adam. I needed to hear it from him. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse, barely audible. He swallowed. It wasn't planned. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go on this long. Didn't mean for it? The phrase made something inside me snap. I took a step back, shaking my head slowly. You were supposed to be my family, I whispered. Both of you. Still, Eleanor said nothing. I trusted you, I said louder, this time looking straight at her. You were in my home. You watched my son grow up. You gave me advice. You told me how lucky I was to have him. Was that part of the performance? That finally made her shift. She looked at me, eyes cool, measured. I didn't come here to hurt you, Cynthia, she said softly. But I won't apologize for what was real. The audacity of those words nearly took my breath away. Real. What was real? The countless nights I waited for Adam to come home late from meetings? The smiles Eleanor offered me while knowing the truth? The mornings I spent wondering if I was enough? I couldn't take it. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest like stone. I reached for the back of my chair to steady myself. I had to leave. If I stayed, I would shatter. No one stopped me. Not Adam. Not Eleanor. Not even my own voice, which usually fought to make sense of chaos. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just turned and walked away, feeling every pair of eyes on me as I passed. And behind me, the silence returned. But now, it wasn't just heavy. It was haunted. I did not slam the door. I wanted to. I wanted the sound to echo through the house like a final punctuation mark, sharp, undeniable, and brutal. But instead, I closed it quietly behind me, as if the noise might betray the storm I carried inside. The night air hit me like a slap. Cold and merciless, it stole the breath from my lungs as soon as I stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the dark sky, blanketing the streets in a deceptive softness that mocked the chaos I had just left behind. I pulled my coat tight around me, the wool brushing against my trembling fingers, and walked. I did not know where I was going. I did not care. Each step crunched beneath my boots with mechanical finality. I walked past the hedge Adam trimmed every spring, past the mailbox where Noah had once left me handmade cards, past the porch where Eleanor once sipped tea and told me stories about her travels. I walked past it all, pieces of a life that now felt like they belonged to someone else. The silence out here was different. Less suffocating, more hollow. But it gave me space to breathe, even if the air was laced with bitterness. I thought of the dinner. The plates I had chosen with care. The seating arrangements I had obsessed over. The candles I had placed in specific holders because Eleanor once said they reminded her of something beautiful. Every detail had been curated to perfection. For them. For us. And they had gutted it all in a single moment. I kept walking, past sleeping houses and glowing windows, past wreaths and twinkling lights and silhouettes of families gathered around trees. Each one a painful reminder of the lie that had unfolded in my own living room. The lie I had lived with unknowingly for 15 years. I should have screamed. I should have demanded to know every detail, every moment they had stolen from me. I should have clawed the truth from their mouths until it bled. But I didn't. Because some truths don't need confirmation. They arrive fully formed, like a blade to the chest. And you feel the cut long before the pain reaches your brain. I reached the end of the street and kept going. The cold seeped into my bones, but I welcomed it. It was something real. Something I could feel. Unlike Adam's words. Unlike Eleanor's silence. I passed the park where I used to take Noah when he was small. The swings were still, dusted in snow. I stood there for a while, staring at them, remembering the way he used to laugh, the way he screamed for me to push him higher, higher, until the sky swallowed him whole. I wondered if he had known. If some part of him had sensed the fracture long before it cracked wide open. And then I remembered the look in his eyes at the table. The shock. The confusion. The betrayal. He hadn't known. He couldn't have. He was just a child who had been dragged into a war he never asked for. My boots had begun to soak through, the snow melting into the seams, numbing my toes. I wrapped my arms around myself and turned back, not toward home, but away from it. Toward Harper's place. The only place that still felt like it belonged to me. With every step, I fought the urge to cry. To collapse. To scream into the night until the pain stopped echoing inside me. But I didn't. Because something deeper than pain had taken root. Something colder than grief. A kind of stillness that only comes when everything you thought was true is suddenly gone. And in that silence, I realized something. This was not the end of a marriage. This was the end of a world. Harper's house smelled like lavender and safety. She didn't ask questions when I arrived. She didn't need to. One look at my face, and she simply opened the door wider, let me in, and wrapped me in a silence that didn't demand answers. She handed me a blanket, a mug of tea I didn't drink, and sat with me until the numbness began to settle. It was in that quiet, curled up on her worn leather couch with the lights dimmed and a single lamp casting long shadows on the wall, that the memories started to come. Not in a flood, not like a scream, but in fragments. In sharp, delicate pieces that cut as they surfaced. The first was a weekend trip. 8 years ago, maybe 9. Adam had said he needed a break from work. Eleanor was visiting at the time and offered to stay with Noah so I could join him. He had insisted I was too tired, that I deserved rest. I had believed him. I had kissed him goodbye at the door and watched him drive off, grateful for the space. But now, I saw it differently. I remembered the look in Eleanor's eyes when she reassured me, her hand gently touching my arm. "You need time for yourself, sweetheart," she'd said. I remembered thinking how kind she was. How generous. Another memory surfaced, Christmas morning, maybe 10 years ago. Eleanor had given Adam a rare edition of The Great Gatsby. She said she found it in a little shop in Boston. He had acted surprised. But now I could see the way he looked at her, not as a man surprised by a gift, but as a lover receiving a token of something sacred. Then there was the 4th of July barbecue. I had taken a photo of the two of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. Their heads tilted together, their expressions too in sync. I had loved that photo. It had hung in our hallway for years. I had thought it captured a moment of joy. But now I realized it captured a secret. And it had been in front of me the entire time. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they came harder, faster. Business trips Adam had taken with vague details. Family events where Eleanor had conveniently stayed a few days longer. Little gestures I had ignored, his phone turned face down, the sudden tension when I entered a room where they'd been talking, the subtle pauses in their conversations. All of it had been there. Laid out in plain sight. And I had refused to see it. I hated myself for that. For the blind trust one had offered so freely, so foolishly. For the way I had woven stories in my head to make everything fit. She's lonely since her husband died, I had told myself. Adam is just being kind. They're close, but not like that. Lies. Lies I had written for them, so they wouldn't have to. Harper sat beside me, her hand on my knee, grounding me. "You are not responsible for their cruelty," she said gently. "You were betrayed. You were not blind, you were trusting. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I had participated in my own undoing. Like I had built the stage, arranged the props, invited the actors, and applauded every scene of the play they wrote behind my back. I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the snow was still falling, soft and relentless. It blanketed the world in white, but it could not cover what I now knew. I had to make sense of it. I had to understand how I had missed so much, for so long. So I began writing. Harper gave me a notebook. I opened it to a blank page and began scribbling down every detail I could remember. Times, places, strange moments, whispered phrases, photos, trips, holidays. Anything that felt off in hindsight. I needed to see the shape of the truth. I needed to make the chaos visible. And in doing so, I realized something else. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had stolen years of my life. But I would not let them steal what came next. It was 2 days after Christmas when the knock came. Harper and I were in the kitchen. She was making coffee. I was staring blankly at a crossword puzzle I hadn't filled in, more interested in the silence between words than the words themselves. When the knock echoed through the house, it startled us both. Harper glanced at me, unsure, then wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer the door. I heard her voice first. Low, tense. What are you doing here? Then silence. Then another voice. Calm. Familiar. Eleanor. I stood slowly, my body already recoiling before I reached the hallway. When I saw her on the porch, coat buttoned to the throat, cheeks flushed from the cold, I stopped breathing for a second. Her presence was like a wound reopened. A chill spread through me, sharper than the winter air that blew in behind her. I need to speak to Cynthia, she said. Not a question. A statement. Harper stepped in front of the doorway, blocking her. You're out of your mind if you think, it's not an apology, Eleanor said, her voice level. She deserves the rest of the truth. That's why I'm here. Something about her tone made me speak. Let her in. Harper turned to me, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Are you sure? I nodded. I didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some twisted need to understand the depth of the betrayal. Or maybe it was because I was tired of imagining things, tired of being the only one stuck in the aftermath. Eleanor stepped inside. The air around her seemed colder than the snow outside. She stood near the doorway, not removing her coat, not making herself comfortable. I'm not here to fight, she said. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, trying to keep myself from shaking. Then what do you want? She looked at me, her face taut, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. To tell you something Adam never would. I felt my stomach tighten. She didn't hesitate. It started long before you think. Not 15 years ago. 20. The words hit like a slap. 20. That's impossible, I said, voice thin. We were already involved when you met him, she said. He and I, God, we were reckless. We thought it would fade. We thought we could walk away from it. And then he met you. And for a while, he tried. I stepped back, dizzy. You're telling me he was with you, and then married me? Eleanor's silence was the answer. He said he wanted to stop, she continued. He told me he loved you. And I believed him. So we ended it. But it didn't stay ended. It never does it? Her voice broke slightly on those words, and for a brief moment, she looked almost human. Not the cold, composed version of her I'd faced days ago. But it didn't make the truth any softer. I watched him build a life with you, she said. I told myself he chose you. And I stayed away. But then, I didn't. I came back. Little by little. And he let me. I couldn't breathe. Every milestone in my life, my engagement, my wedding, the birth of my son, was now stained with this knowledge. I had never been chosen. I had been a detour. A cover. A consolation prize in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because he never will, Eleanor said. He'll protect his version of the story. He'll make it seem like it just happened, like it was a mistake that dragged on. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you were never the obstacle. You were the excuse. The silence that followed felt endless. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at her, at this woman who had shaped so much of who I thought I was, teacher, and friend, and now stood before me as the architect of my undoing. She turned to leave. I won't come back, she said. I just wanted you to know the full weight of it. You deserve that much. When the door closed behind her, Harper walked back in, her face pale with fury. I want her gone, she said. Out of your life. Forever. I didn't respond. I just sat down at the table, staring at the mug of cold coffee. Because now I knew the full story. And it was so much worse than I had imagined. It was 2 days after Christmas when the knock came. Harper and I were in the kitchen. She was making coffee. I was staring blankly at a crossword puzzle I hadn't filled in, more interested in the silence between words than the words themselves. When the knock echoed through the house, it startled us both. Harper glanced at me, unsure, then wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer the door. I heard her voice first. Low, tense. What are you doing here? Then silence. Then another voice. Calm. Familiar. Eleanor. I stood slowly, my body already recoiling before I reached the hallway. When I saw her on the porch, coat buttoned to the throat, cheeks flushed from the cold, I stopped breathing for a second. Her presence was like a wound reopened. A chill spread through me, sharper than the winter air that blew in behind her. I need to speak to Cynthia, she said. Not a question. A statement. Harper stepped in front of the doorway, blocking her. You're out of your mind if you think, it's not an apology, Eleanor said, her voice level. She deserves the rest of the truth. That's why I'm here. Something about her tone made me speak. Let her in. Harper turned to me, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Are you sure? I nodded. I didn't. No, why? Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some twisted need to understand the depth of the betrayal. Or maybe it was because I was tired of imagining things, tired of being the only one stuck in the aftermath. Eleanor stepped inside. The air around her seemed colder than the snow outside. She stood near the doorway, not removing her coat, not making herself comfortable. I'm not here to fight, she said. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, trying to keep myself from shaking. Then what do you want? She looked at me, her face taut, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. To tell you something Adam never would. I felt my stomach tighten. She didn't hesitate. It started long before you think. Not 15 years ago. 20. The words hit like a slap. 20. That's impossible, I said, voice thin. We were already involved when you met him, she said. He and I, God, we were reckless. We thought it would fade. We thought we could walk away from it. And then he met you. And for a while, he tried. I stepped back, dizzy. You're telling me he was with you, and then married me? Eleanor's silence was the answer. He said he wanted to stop, she continued. He told me he loved you. And I believed him. So we ended it. But it didn't stay ended. It never does it? Her voice broke slightly on those words, and for a brief moment, she looked almost human. Not the cold, composed version of her I'd faced days ago. But it didn't make the truth any softer. I watched him build a life with you, she said. I told myself he chose you. And I stayed away. But then, I didn't. I came back. Little by little. And he let me. I couldn't breathe. Every milestone in my life, my engagement, my wedding, the birth of my son, was now stained with this knowledge. I had never been chosen. I had been a detour. A cover. A consolation prize in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because he never will, Eleanor said. He'll protect his version of the story. He'll make it seem like it just happened, like it was a mistake that dragged on. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you were never the obstacle. You were the excuse. The silence that followed felt endless. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at her, at this woman who had shaped so much of who I thought I was, teacher, aunt, friend, and now stood before me as the architect of my undoing. She turned to leave. I won't come back, she said. I just wanted you to know the full weight of it. You deserve that much. When the door closed behind her, Harper walked back in, her face pale with fury. I want her gone, she said. Out of your life. Forever. I didn't respond. I just sat down at the table, staring at the mug of cold coffee. Because now I knew the full story. And it was so much worse than I had imagined. The first betrayal had torn through my heart like glass. But the second, that came with numbers, ledgers, cold facts, it settled into my bones, a slow, relentless poison that left no part of me untouched. Dana called me 3 days after I had sent her the files. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Cynthia, she said. We found something. You need to come in. I was already halfway out the door before she finished. In her office, Dana laid out the statements, color-coded and annotated with sticky notes like a battlefield map. She pointed to one folder. These are your family savings accounts, college fund, retirement, emergency. And here, she pulled another sheet forward, these are the withdrawals made over the last 5 years. I leaned in, trying to make sense of the numbers. They're small at first. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. But then they get bolder. 5,000. 10,000. One even for $23,000. I felt my hands go cold. Where did the money go? Dana clicked her pen and pointed to a cluster of hotel charges, airfare, and boutique expenses. These were charged under Adam's name. But several were booked using a secondary credit card. One you were never issued. The dates, they lined up with holidays, long weekends, even times when Noah had been sick and I had stayed home while Adam claimed he couldn't cancel a business trip. I stared at the printouts. That's Noah's college fund. Dana nodded. Parts of it. The rest came from your joint savings. But the fact that he touched that account? It changes things. My mind reeled. Every sacrifice we had made to build that fund. Every birthday Noah agreed to a small party instead of a big one. Every decision made with the future in mind, all siphoned away to finance their affair. They used our son's future to pay for their secret, I whispered. Dana didn't respond. She didn't have to. I left her office in a haze. My fingers shook as I drove back to Harper's. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was theft. Of trust. Of safety. Of legacy. That night, I told Noah. I didn't want to. He was still at home for winter break, and part of me wanted to protect him a little longer. But he had a right to know. To understand why things would change. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, wearing his old hoodie and biting the edge of his thumbnail like he used to when he was little. I handed him the printed summary. He didn't look at it right away. I know you're angry, I said. He looked up, and his voice cracked. I'm not angry. I waited. I'm ashamed, he said. My heart broke again, in a new place. Noah, none of this is your fault. I know. But I feel like I should have seen something. Said something. I lived in that house, Mom. He didn't cry, but his eyes shimmered in a way that made me want to reach across the table and undo the last 18 years. Instead, I said the only truth I had left. They hurt us both. But we're still here. And we're not going to let them decide what happens next. He nodded. Slowly. What are you going to do? I didn't hesitate. Everything I can. The next day, I met again with Dana. We drafted a formal separation notice, along with a petition for financial disclosure. If Adam wanted to bury the truth under silence, I would drag it into daylight. I also called the university's legal aid office. Not because I feared losing my job, but because I knew Adam would try to spin this. He always spun things. Charm, misdirection, half-truths. But this time, I would be ready. I resumed my sessions with Dr. Klein, going twice a week now. The more I spoke, the more I realized that I had spent years walking on a foundation that had never been solid. That I had accepted so many half-answers just to keep peace. That silence, more than anything, had been my enemy. And now I was done being silent. I kept writing. Filling notebooks with every memory, every pattern, every moment that felt wrong in hindsight. I didn't care if it ever became a book. I needed to see it all. I needed to name it. Because when someone robs you in the dark, the first step to healing is turning on every light you can. The attic was cold, dust-laced, and silent. I hadn't set foot there in years. It had always been Adam's space, the place he kept old tax boxes, photo albums, college yearbooks, and the sentimental clutter he refused to part with. But now, I climbed the creaking stairs with a flashlight in hand, driven by a need that was almost primal. I was searching for something. I didn't know exactly what. Proof? Closure? Maybe just a sign that my instincts hadn't betrayed me completely. The boxes were stacked haphazardly, labeled in Adam's neat handwriting. Winter gear. College books. Christmas decor. But one box, unmarked, set apart in the far corner, caught my eye. It was wrapped in old newspaper, almost as if someone had tried to hide it. I knelt and pulled it toward me. Inside, I found cards. Dozens of them. Handwritten letters tied in ribbons, the ink faded but still legible. Not addressed to me. Not even hidden under the guise of something else. They were from Adam. To Eleanor. The earliest dated back almost 2 decades. I sat there, legs numb, hands trembling as I read the first. Boston. April. I watched her across the bookstore, laughing at something Noah said, and all I could think was, when will this lie end? I want you. I always have. The words blurred. I swallowed hard and opened the next. You said I had to choose. But you know I can't. Cynthia is stability. But you are everything else. One day she'll understand that what we have is beyond rules, beyond titles. And another. Christmas is hardest. She decorates like her life depends on it. Maybe it does. I wonder if she senses us. I think sometimes she does. My body turned cold. The walls of the attic seemed to lean in around me. I kept reading. Letter after letter. One day she'll forgive me for loving you. Or maybe she won't. But I don't regret it. We are soulmates. And one day, everything else will fall away. I pressed the last letter against my knees, trying not to shake. The phrase echoed in my mind like a taunt. Soulmates. So that was it. I hadn't just been left. I hadn't just been deceived. I had been replaced in their minds long before I ever saw it coming. I set the letters aside and reached deeper into the box. At the bottom, nestled in tissue paper, was a photo. A candid one. Adam and Eleanor, sitting side by side on a park bench. He was touching her hand. She was looking at him, not smiling, but certain. Confident. Like someone who had already won. There was a date written on the back. Noah was barely 3 years old at the time. I placed everything back in the box and carried it downstairs. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was beyond that now. Harper was in the kitchen when I returned, and she took one look at my face before turning off the stove. "What is it?" she asked. I opened the box and laid out the letters. She read the first one. Then the second. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing. "They planned it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All of it. It wasn't a mistake. It was a long-term strategy. They kept me just close enough not to suspect, but always far enough that I wouldn't interfere." She didn't speak. She just stood beside me as I laid the letters out like pieces of a puzzle. I photocopied each one. For Dana. For the court. Because this wasn't just a betrayal of vows. This was a dismantling of truth. A systematic removal of my place in my own life. They hadn't just loved each other behind my back. They had built a secret world in parallel to mine, using my trust, my time, and my silence as their scaffolding. That night, I wrote for 5 straight hours. I wrote about the letters. The photographs. The day Noah said Eleanor felt more like a grandmother than an aunt. I wrote about how I used to call her the other mother and laugh, never knowing how close that joke was to something real. I wrote until the truth became a narrative. Until it stopped being chaos and started being evidence. Because now I had something more powerful than their secrets. I had a voice. It was Harper who said it first. "You should gather them. All of them. Not for revenge, just so no one can pretend anymore." The idea felt absurd at first. Invite Adam? Eleanor? Back to a table, after what they had done? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how necessary it was. Not for closure. Not for dramatics. For truth. Spoken aloud. Heard by all. So I did it. I called each person. My parents. My in-laws. My sister-in-law. Noah. Even Adam and Eleanor. I told them there would be dinner. That it was important. That I would speak, and I expected them to listen. No one refused. The night came, and I hosted it not in our old house, but at Harper's. The table was set simply, without ceremony. No candles, no decor, no illusion of warmth. Just seats, plates, and silence waiting to be filled. They arrived one by one, unsure. Cautious. Adam was the last to enter, followed closely by Eleanor. They didn't sit together. That told me everything about their guilt. Even shared betrayal had its limits. I stood at the head of the table, hands resting on the back of my chair. "I asked you all here," I began, "because there are things you need to see. Things that have lived in silence long enough." I opened a folder and laid out the documents. First, the financial records. Bank statements. Account withdrawals. The timeline of deceit built not just on lies of the heart, but theft. I passed them around. I watched their eyes scan the numbers, watched expressions shift from confusion to anger to stunned silence. Then I placed the letters on the table. One by one. Dozens of them. "I found these in our attic," I said, looking directly at Adam. "Your words. Your secrets. Your truth." He opened the first letter. Read one line. Then folded it and set it down. His jaw was locked, his throat tight. I turned to Eleanor. "You were supposed to be family," I said. "You were supposed to be mine." She didn't reply. Her eyes were glassy, lips slightly parted, as if words were forming but would never come. I faced the others. "You all need to understand something. This didn't happen by accident. It wasn't a slip or a mistake. It was a design. It was deliberate. For 20 years, I lived a life that was edited, rearranged, manipulated. And now, I'm taking it back. No one spoke. The air was thick with shame and disbelief. I am not asking for apologies, I continued. Not anymore. I don't need them. What I need is to end this story where it truly ends. Here. With all of you knowing what was done. I placed the final photo of Adam and Eleanor on that bench at the center of the table. This, I said, is the truth you were never supposed to see. The version of events that lived in the shadows while I kept trying to light a home. Noah sat at the far end, his face unreadable. I looked at him. I'm sorry you had to carry any of this. You deserved better than the weight of their choices. He nodded once, solemn, and whispered, so did you. I stepped back. I won't be asking for reconciliation. I won't be rebuilding. I will be starting over. Without lies. Without half-stories. Without any of this. Adam opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. No. You had 18 years. You don't get to speak now. Silence returned, not heavy this time, but final. I walked away from the table, out of the dining room, past the memories, past the faces that had once meant everything. I didn't look back. Because that night wasn't about them. It was about the woman I had been, the woman I had become, and the line drawn cleanly between the two. In the quiet that followed the dinner, I felt something unexpected, relief. Not peace. Not yet. But relief. Like I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. The days that Essie Seguiram were strangely calm. There were no phone calls, no attempts at apologies. Even Adam stayed away. Maybe he finally understood that nothing he could say would change the weight of what had been done. Eleanor vanished back into Boston, or maybe somewhere else, I didn't ask. I didn't care. But there was still something left undone. Something I hadn't allowed myself to fully confront. Forgiveness. Not the kind people expect. Not the kind that comes with hugs or second chances. But the kind that cuts the last string tying you to the past. The kind you give not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be free. It started in therapy. Dr. Klein asked me a question I didn't want to answer. What would it take for you to forgive them? My answer came slowly, but it was honest. I want to forgive, but only if it means I never have to carry this pain again. And so, I sat with that idea. I returned to the letters, not to wallow, but to understand. I read them aloud in session. I named the anger, the grief, the betrayal. I let every emotion pass through me like a storm that no longer terrified me. Then I wrote my own letter. Not to send. Just to say it. I addressed it to both of them. I forgive you. Not for your sake. Not because what you did is excusable. But because I refuse to let it define me any longer. I will not wear your choices like chains. I will not let your secrets shape my future. You broke me. But I rebuilt. And the version of me that rises from this is not yours to touch. Goodbye. The next day, I made the decision I had been circling for weeks. I would leave Vermont. Not in shame. Not in defeat. But in full ownership of my story. My job at the university had already begun its spring semester planning. I met with the dean, a woman I deeply respected, and told her everything minus the dramatics. Just facts. She listened with compassion and offered me a sabbatical. I declined. I need to leave, I told her. Not to escape. To begin. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Like turning the final page of a long, painful chapter. I spent the next few weeks sorting my life into boxes. Some things I left behind, old photos, furniture, anything that carried too much weight. Other things came with me, my books, my notebooks, a single portrait of Noah as a child, and the garden stones Eleanor once gave me that I no longer feared. I told Noah my plan over breakfast. I've found a job in Portland. A community school. Small. Simple. It's what I need. He looked at me, spoon midair. That's far. I know. But I'll still be your mother. Every day. No matter how many miles. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't need to. Because deep down, he understood that sometimes leaving isn't running away. Sometimes it's returning to yourself. On my last night in Vermont, I walked through the house one final time. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper goodbyes to the walls. I simply turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the cold with my head high. I wasn't just walking away from a marriage. I was walking toward a life that would finally belong to me. Portland greeted me with rain. Not a storm. Not a downpour. Just that quiet, persistent drizzle that soaked into the edges of everything. I arrived in January when the air was still sharp with winter and the streets felt like whispers instead of chaos. It was exactly what I needed. The house I rented was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a little front porch with chipped railings and a garden that hadn't seen love in years. It was perfect. No memories haunted the corners. No ghosts waited in the hallways. Just possibility. I unpacked slowly, letting each box feel like a decision. I placed books on the shelves alphabetically at first, then emotionally, stacking favorites near the bed like talismans. I hung one picture, Noah, age 5, holding a paper crown he had made in kindergarten. His smile in that photo reminded me that even in the middle of pain, joy had existed. Still existed. The school was a modest building tucked between an old church and a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and old novels. They welcomed me like a missing piece, not a new one. I was to teach literature to students who often wore hoodies over their uniforms and came from lives that rarely offered comfort. I saw in their eyes the same rawness I had come to recognize in myself. It didn't take long before I began to feel something strange. Steadiness. I bought a used bicycle and rode through quiet streets lined with moss-covered fences. I found a bookstore owned by an elderly couple who remembered names and preferences. I planted herbs in small pots and lined the kitchen windowsill with them. Each morning, the scent of basil and mint reminded me that life could be cultivated again, in simple ways. I adopted a dog. A quiet, aging shepherd mix named Margot from the local shelter. She didn't bark. She didn't demand. She just stayed close. At night, she lay curled at the foot of my bed, and I felt less alone. I started waking up earlier. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted the silence before the world stirred. I wanted the time to drink coffee slowly and write without watching the clock. My journals filled quickly, not with pain anymore, but with observations. Thoughts. Dreams. I began to remember who I was before the betrayal. Before Adam. Before the facade. I was a woman who loved language. Who once wrote poetry in the margins of her notebooks. Who used to dream of teaching in places just like this, where names mattered more than grades, and stories were treated like lifelines, not assignments. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't lonely. Because every corner of this new life belonged to me. When Noah called, we talked about everything, his classes, his roommate, the bands he was discovering. He asked how I was, and I told him the truth. I'm good. Really good. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. He heard it in my voice. One weekend, he came to visit. We walked through a Saturday market where vendors sold handmade soaps and ceramic mugs. We ate fresh bread and talked about nothing important. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You're different here." I smiled. Maybe I'm just finally myself. He nodded, as if he had always hoped for that. There were no grand revelations. No cinematic moments. Just a slow unfolding, like spring beneath snow. The woman who arrived in Portland was cracked, but not broken. And day by day, those cracks became space for light. I wrote a short story and submitted it to a local magazine. It was about a woman who starts over in a city where no one knows her name. They published it. It wasn't much. But it was mine. And that night, holding the printed copy in my hands, I whispered aloud in the dark, I made it. Not out of the pain, but through it. The house smelled like rosemary and orange zest. It was Christmas Eve again. 1 year later. The table was set, not with the antique china from Vermont, not with heirloom silverware, but with mismatched plates I had collected from second-hand stores. Each one was different. Each one chosen. There were candles, yes, but simple ones. A string of lights hung across the kitchen archway. The oven hummed. Margot snored softly near the back door. My guests were not family by blood, but by presence. Colleagues from the school. A neighbor who had brought me soup the week I moved in. A student who had nowhere else to go. Their laughter filled the corners of the house in a way that didn't feel forced. There were no ghosts at this table. Only people who saw me as I was now. We ate slowly, speaking between bites, letting silences come and go like music. I didn't worry about impressing anyone. I didn't wait for anything to break. Nothing felt borrowed or fragile. Everything was rooted. Then, just as we were clearing the dishes, the doorbell rang. I paused, surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone else. When I opened the door, the porch light cast a soft glow on Noah. He was taller, broader somehow. His coat dusted with snow, a shy smile on his face. Surprise. He stepped inside, carrying a wrapped package under one arm. I thought you had plans, I said, pulling him into a hug. I changed them, he replied simply. We returned to the kitchen, and I introduced him to the others. He slid easily into the space, asked questions, made people laugh. He had always had that gift. And I watched him, not with nostalgia, but with pride. Not for who he had been. For who he was becoming. After dessert, when the last guest had left and the dishes were stacked but not washed, Noah handed me the package. It's not much, he said. But it felt right. I sat on the couch, Margot's head in my lap, and unwrapped it slowly. It was a book. Leather-bound, worn at the edges. Inside the cover, a note in his handwriting. For the strongest woman I know. I see you. I always did. Love, Noah. I didn't cry. Not at first. But as I ran my fingers over the words, as the weight of this year, the grief, the loss, the reclamation, settled in my chest, the tears came. Not of sorrow. Not of pain. Gratitude. For survival. For change. For finding my voice in the silence. For the space to begin again. Noah didn't say anything. He just sat beside me, shoulder against mine, the way he used to when he was small and the world was too big. And in that moment, I knew that what had been broken would never be the same, but that didn't mean it would always hurt. This dinner wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about tradition. It was about presence. About earning back the pieces of myself, one small ritual at a time. I looked around the room, this modest home, this rebuilt life, and whispered to myself, this is mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt full. Not of food. Of peace.